Hi, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 2 of The Great Cosmic Mother, Marx and the Matriarchy, written by Monica Saju and Barbara Moore. Marx and the Matriarchy. Ancient women-oriented groupings were the original communism. Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx recognized this. Engels especially refers to the mother right concepts of J.J. Bachofen, and both men based their analyses of social development on the primary existence of ancient matriarchies, i.e., communal matrifocal systems. In this, they were influenced by the writings of Lewis Morgan, an American anthropologist. Morgan lived with and studied the tribal society of the Iroquois, and in their kinship structure, language, and customs, he found evidence of early communal and blood relationships based on different stages of group marriage. In Ancient Society, written in 1800s, Morgan offered his conclusion that such a society was matrilinear and matrifocal of necessity, since within a group marriage structure, only the mother can be definitely known as the parent of a child. We know that similar evidence can be found all over the world. For example, many kinship systems distinguish between the biological father of a child and the social father, who is usually the mother's brother or male relative. The social father is considered the real father in these societies. Identity and inheritance are passed along through the female bloodlines. But pioneers that they were, neither Morgan, Engels, nor Marx were fully aware of women's real functions and achievements in past cultures. Nor were they tuned in to the total gestalt of early peoples. With Marx and Engels, and in particular with their dogmatic interpreters and followers, a narrowing focus to strictly economic and class analysis has totally obscured the original human state of being, which was much more profoundly spiritual and economic. This Marxist narrowing of focus and its consequent denial of human experience has had the tragic repercussions throughout the world. How did this happen? Karl Marx, and Engels as well, was a deeply compassionate man. His opium of the people statement, which is never fairly quoted, is evidence of this. Religious distress is at the same time the expression of real distress and the protest against real distress. Religion is the sigh of oppressive creature, the heart of the heartless world, just as it is the spirit of a spiritless situation. It is the opium of the people. The demand to give up the illusions about its conditions is the demand to give up a condition that needs illusion. Criticism has plucked the imaginary flowers from the chain, not so that men will wear the chain without any fantasy or consolation, but so that they will break the chain and cull the living flower. No one has said it better or more clearly recognized the human being's absolute right to cling to spirit in a spiritless situation and to heart in a heartless world. Because spirit and heart are real, and they alone have helped millions of human beings survive in otherwise unsurvivable situations. The tragedy of Marx and of Marxists was to confuse spirit with established religions. They saw clearly and historically that established religion aligned itself with the oppressor, the oppressing class, the oppressing monarchy, the oppressing social and economic systems. They saw the seeds of oppression in religious doctrines that rationalize poverty and enslavement and excuse brutal tyranny and greed by setting God's seal on social systems based on hierarchies of rich and poor, hierarchies of rulers and the ruled. They saw the wealth and power of the churches and the wretched passivity of the believers. They saw that the church was, in fact, a very man-made institution that gained and retained power by exploiting the reality of the spirit versus the reality of physical need. They heard sermons condemning material wealth and earthly pleasures, while the churchmen and their rich supporters lived in opulent security, and the mass of believers lived on their stony knees in rags. And they heard these conditions justified as God's plan for man, and they saw that religious establishments take it upon themselves to define spirit and God and human destiny, always in their own elitist terms, and only to their own worldly advantage. Seeing these things, Marxists rightly condemned the collusion of established religions and the historic oppression of human beings. Tragically, they also denied the reality of the human spirit and its genuine longings. They rightly wanted to save humanity from religious exploitation. But in their narrowing of focus, their economic and class reductiveness, they split the human being into two conflicting parts: material existence versus spiritual existence. This split was just the mere image of the already existing religious dualism. As dogmatic Marxist communism unfolded in country after country, this split reinforced the same alienation of the human condition that Marx had wanted to resolve. It has created the dreary state capitalism of Soviet Russia and its satellites, in which the state works dourly and mechanically to enforce its definition of human life as spiritless mechanism. It has given fuel to the propaganda engines of the reactionary systems in all countries, so that the world is ripped apart in a false dichotomy between godless communism and divine capitalism. For if communism is atheistic, its opponents can claim to be mandated by God, however phony this claim might be. Finally, it's turned away untold millions of oppressed human beings who need the economic and social analysis of Marxism to clarify and change their situations, but who fear that they're being asked to buy this analysis at the price of their own living souls. No matter how corrupt and collusive the established religions of the world are known to be, they still stand there offering themselves as the only sanctuaries of spirit in a spiritless world. Marxism stands, unfortunately, in the perception of too many people as a total fanatical repudiation of spiritual reality. And this perception of Marxism has helped to fuel the equally fanatic revivals of fundamentalist religions throughout the world today. Marx and Engels confuse spirit with established religion, as their doctrine followers continue to do, because as Western white males, they could not see the total paradigm of ancient women's original communism. Coming from this linear, fragmented, and reductive Western tradition, which has its historical roots in the Judeo-Christian Bible, as well as the Aristotelian, Platonic, Greco-Roman hyper-rationality, they could not comprehend the primal holism of human experience on Earth. As a result, Marxism tends to reinforce, rather oppose, Western capitalism's notorious strategy of alienation. Marxist analysis generally are obsessed with the isolating economic productive development from magical religious sexual development. As Paul Cardin, a libertarian thinker, writes, there is the Marxist assumption that throughout human history, societies have always aimed first and foremost to increase production and consumption. But the human being doesn't at birth bear within itself the finishing meaning of his life. The maximization of consumption or the power or of sanctity are not tendencies inherent in the newborn child. It is the prevailing culture in which he will be brought up that will teach him that he needs these things. The cultivation of maize among the Mexican tribes or the cultivation of rice in some Indonesian villages is not only a means of ensuring food. Agricultural labor is also lived as goddess and child worship, as festival, as dance. And when some Marxist theoretician comes along and claims that on these occasions, everything which is not directly productive labor is but mystification, illusion, or cunning of reason, and it must be forcibly pointed out that he himself, a far more complicated personification of patriarchy and capitalism than any mere boss could be. What he is saying is that everything that humans have done or sought to do in history was only crude prefigurations of the factory system. If the Marxist in this case was denouncing or trying to eliminate patriarchal religion founded on privilege and property and mystification of reality, and functioning through the exploitation of human labor and human sexuality, that would be fine. But he is also denying what is the very truth of human existence and the essence of the original matriarchies, the experienced unity of psychic, productive, sexual, cosmic power and activity in the egalitarian collective of women. For this is precisely what patriarchy sets out to do, to split material production from spiritual experience, science from magic, medicine from herbal knowledge, in the psychic seasonal environment, sexuality from the sacred, art from the craft, astronomy from astrology, language from poetry, and to replace the resultant specialized, abstracted, and mechanistic knowledge in the hands of the privileged male elite, organized into professions, hierarchies, and classes. To reduce the ecstatic dance of muscle, blood, and soul to factory assembly lines, production output schedules, and the gross national product. Patriarchy divides into higher and lower categories labeled spirit versus nature, mind versus matter. And typically this is the alienated symbolism. The superior mind, spirit mind is male and or white, while the inferior nature and matter is female and or black. This false dualistic symbolism arises from the enforced order of male domination. With the aid of such phallic psychology, men can then go about the earth, raping nature, exploiting resources and human labor, manipulating and improving her with technological, mechanical inventions and progressive goals. In patriarchy, man separates from earth, emulating some aloof and disconnected sky god of his own creation. And this intellectual separations make him feel free to devastate the natural world without any sense that it belongs to a common ecosystem within himself. He exploits it, totally alienated from the fact that his own continuity with it. For the deluded profit of the few and the existential pain of the many, patriarchy exists by destroying the original holism. When it refutes or opposes the reality of human spiritual experience, Marxist communism does not resolve this destruction. It only compounds it with a different rhetoric. It gets rid of God and church only to substitute with another tyranny, that of the state or the machine, or the party, or the production quota. It does not truly free human beings. It only changes the brand name of the chains. A truly human politics must study the entire history of the world's religions and spiritual beliefs. It must try to return to or move towards spiritual systems that are harmonious with all our visions in creative and communal life. Because this is what is missing under both of the competing world powers, a creative communal life. Both systems, Western capitalism and Soviet communism, are based on the denial of the communal celebration. For celebration is a play of the spirit, and there is no profit in communal existence. But human evolution, human creativity is a real miracle and a cosmic fact. We need a politics that participates in this biological spiritual adventure. Neither the god of the dollar, nor the god of the state, nor any other alienating patriarchal gods from which they descend allow for this participation. Wilhelm Reich is not commonly connected with Marxism, but this is where he began. His early work was an attempt to link the Marxist economic class analysis with a psychoanalytical understanding of the significance of sexual repression and the development of fascist patriarchal society. This attempt was most successful, and for it, he was excommunicated by both European Communist Party and the Freudian psychoanalytical circles, i.e., he was onto something. In The Mass Psychology of Fascism and the other work of the 1930s, Reich chronicled the successful manipulation of the German people by Nazi ideology. On the deepest psychological and biological levels, he argued, the people had already been conditioned by generations of religious and culturally directed psychosexual repression to respond obediently and to cooperate unquestioningly with sadism, tyranny, and genocide. An anti-sexual religious morality, paranoid concepts of blood purity, and rigid sense of ethnic superiority had already been wired into the nervous system of the torturer and clenched the muscles inside the black gloves and boots. As Reich predicted, in fact, a hypnotic leader like Hitler does not create these conditions. He only exploits them. Fascism is not a wild, barbaric phenomena that appears suddenly and without reason in the midst of civilization. It is the result of a long conditioning process, and the institutions that do the conditioning are those of the civilization itself. One of Reich's major points was that the Marxist communism and European socialism generally narrowed down to an objective focus on economic and class relationships, and they were unable to participate and analyze or prevent the Nazi triumph, which was a massively subjective explosion of a psychologically conditioned people into brutal expression. Further, the syndrome of fascism was not confined to the Germans. Fascist thought and behavior is not a national aberration, but a historically ingrained feature of the psyche of all Western civilized people, a feature clearly visible in the history of Western colonialism and imperialism. The political point was this: at the point in history, changing the objective economic social systems alone is not enough. Repressive behavior, sadistic power relations, competitive greed to exploit, dominate, and humiliate, and our accommodations to do these insults are by now conditioned into the nervous system of each member of our civilized societies. Both oppressors and victims are damaged by the experience. The repressive wiring of the nervous system occurs at the most intimate levels of sex and the spirit. The recreation of the human being must occur on these levels also if we desire a truly human revolution, one that does more than just change the guard. This point is of importance to feminists who have already observed that sexist dominating male behavior can occur along the entire political spectrum from right to left. The repression, control, and exploitation of female sexuality is a major tool of the patriarchy because it goes hand in hand with the exploitation of female labor. Left-wing males who see no connection between labor exploitation and sexual exploitation have failed to make a total analysis, or in Reich's terms, they have failed to undergo a total revolution on the neuron level and are still wired for oppression. Reich pointed out that in the 1930s, the prevalent male sexual fantasy in male-dominated society is one of rape. And he knew that this was not a personal fantasy, but a political one, with political repercussions. He was very clear on how the sexual repression of women has been the most powerful patriarchal weapon in creating social victims. Females who have been weakened, made dependent, fearful, or ashamed of their own bodies, and punished for these functions. Sexual psychological prey to any predator. Such creatures are easy to exploit politically and economically. People who do not have their own sex cannot have their own labor. Unfortunately, Reich was a strict heterosexual, unsympathetic to homosexuality, and too influenced by Freudian ideas of female sexuality, and these problems have been passed along to us at the expense of his gifts. He missed the connections between bisexuality and psychic wholeness, but in his comprehension of the profound and intentional links between sexual repression and political repression, he was always right on target. Marx said human power is its own end, and he was devoted to the liberation and enjoyment of healthy human power as the only valid political goal. Biological energy, unrepressed and undistorted, he saw as a continuum of cosmic energy with no non-organic distinctions made between the physical and the spiritual. He saw both as forms of one energy. He called it organi, manifest through the universe, the same in nerve cells and stars as in human consciousness. This evolutionary energy surging from all life forms as an energy field in space, he defined as a spiritual reality as well as a physical force. And he believed that politics included the realignment of the oppressed human being with this original creative flow. Reich was no mechanistic ideologue, but a political muse. Therefore, he was banished from the Communist Party and psychoanalytical profession circles in Europe and had to flee Nazi Germany. He ended up in the United States with his books destroyed by the federal government and his work outlawed, and he died in a federal prison because he was probably onto something. Another problem area among Marxists is the assumption that the matriarchal society, where it existed, occurred only at very low stages of production and under only primitive conditions. This assumption echoes the generalized linearity and chauvinism of Western history, which tends to see all other cultures and other in space and time as merely preliminary stages on the way towards modern development, or as sadly failed attempts to achieve the freeway and the ball bearing. In fact, the evidence shows that some of the most advanced societies in the ancient world, technologically as well as culturally advanced, were also matrifocal, i.e., women-oriented and led by women. The early Cretans were worshippers of the goddess, and Cretan women were priestesses, judges, doctors, artisans, athletes, business entrepreneurs, and cultural leaders on all levels. Crete was the major cultural and trading center of the day, with ships traveling to Ireland, Spain, Africa, the Near East for gold and tin. One of the things exported was the Cretan lineal script, whose syllabary was then passed through the Greeks and the Phoenicians. At home, the Cretans had indoor baths with hot and cold water running through ceramic pipes. Cretan plumbing in 1700 BC was far superior to anything achieved in Europe until well after AD 1700. The graceful and artistic Etruscans were also matriarchal, and so were the early Egyptians. Traces of the matriarchy existed in Egypt down to the later empires and dynasties. In these cultures, as in many others, the family group lived on land that belonged collectively to the mothers. A woman's husband or lover lived with the woman and her kin group. Children, regardless of the father's identity or legal relation, lived with the mother's family group. Ancient Egyptian law clearly designated that all female property, land, and household goods belonged to the woman, and that she, married or unmarried, had total disposition of her own belongings, including herself. No one studying the Cretans, Etruscans, or Egyptians could refer to these cultures as primitive. Very advanced cultures were also developed by the matriarchal Dahomey and Ashanti peoples of West Africa and by the Naya people in Kerala of southern India. Among Native Americans, it's largely the matrifocality of the Pueblo people that has allowed them to endure so long in their own ways, with the strong architectural technologies developed among them. The dwelling places of all these people, from portable grass huts to multi-storied apartment buildings, were not simply maintained by women, women built them. Everywhere homesite technology was originally seen as women's province. We are not saying that matriarchy was a system in which women went around ruling everyone with a big stick. Matriarchies were not built on dominance principles, but on the facts of blood kinship, including the primacy of the mother. Women owned their bodies, their children, and their living properties. Women made vital decisions affecting the survival and well-being of their people. There was no way by which an elite group of men could set up laws to restrict women's movements, ideas, or sexual activities. Economic relations were not experienced as separate from religious and social relationships. They were originally based off gift exchange, which served a communal bonding function, not a competitive or profit-making one. Material goods had value only in terms of the social or spiritual uses to which they were put. If Marxists tend to underrate the ancient matrifocal cultures as primitive or underdeveloped, this is only because Marxists share Western prejudices about development. They are assuming that all cultures, ancient and modern, are to be judged according to how close they come to approximating the industrial factory system and with its quantitative production, regardless of the life quality of the cultures being evaluated. In this prejudice, Marxists and the stock market men seem to share equally.